So I don't really know what to do with this. Hi, here's a walkthrough of what I'm doing. Here's the original sketch I made to get the idea down. Then I did some like Photoshop clearing up of it, a bit more informed. Then an isometric view of the one I like the most to kind of explore the forms a bit better. Then from this, I did like a Photoshop based on what I liked and didn't like, and tried to make it a bit more modern. Yeah, it's kind of based on like old sports cars, like concept cars from back then, and Tron helmets, and later Star Wars helmets, I think, to try and get to fit in the world a bit better. So then I went on to a Concept Sculpt. So the Concept Sculpt was me working over a 3D printed skull to try and create something uh, a bit more real, so I could understand the forms in 3 dimensions as opposed to just on a piece of paper or a screen. This probably took about 2 hours, start to finish. And as you can see by my hands, is about palm shaped. It was a really good way of exploring the forms and seeing how it actually fitted in with the human proportions. That's why I was using the skull specifically. Yeah, it helped me change a few things to get it right. And then I moved on to the isometric views that I could use for reference for digital modeling. So I started off by taking these photos, but then found out that they had the perspective, which wasn't working. So I went outside and took photos further away, but zoomed in more to create a better perspective, lack of perspective, I should say. I then sketched over these to try and get the forms more basic, but then decided it was better to just use them as they were in Fusion. So this is where I started the difficult task of trying to create the form in 3D modeling. I'd never used the form tool set in Fusion before, but I was really interested in natural sculpting, I guess, as opposed to parametric sculpting, where you put in each of the measurements to create something very accurate. This is a bit more like using a ball of clay, I guess, is the way I describe it. Yeah, it's just about you put your reference in and you put them together to get them as they should be in the right perspective and interlacing with each other. So then when you put your ball of clay, quote unquote, in the middle, you then take a point and you'll check if that point works on each of the views to make sure it's in the right place in 3-dimensional space. I kind of found this quite difficult and maybe thought, oh, parametric might work. As you can see here, me trying to use the old tool set, and I was like, no, I'm going to work through and try and create something using the form tools instead, because I thought the more organic shapes would suit the helmet a lot better, and it was something I wanted to work on anyway. So yeah, I started using the quad ball, which I guess works differently to the sphere tool, because the quad ball uses, if you imagine a cube with rounded sides to make it into a sphere, that shape, all of the faces all come to 4 points, which apparently in digital modeling makes the whole thing easier for the computer to understand. Yeah, it was really hard. It was really, really hard work. I mean, you've probably seen at this point 20 hours of work, I'd say, just digitally trying to figure it out. Then I moved on to using a sphere, because after some research I found that apparently a sphere might be an easier starting point, which I did find it was. I think it's a mixture of having used it, so having a bit more fluency in the tools I can use, like moving all the points individually to match up with all of the reference, but also I think I found the way that curves wrapped around in a sphere was quite inducive of creating organic shapes, especially the ones I wanted to produce. And yeah, I started to get somewhere a bit closer with it, and I was getting happier, but I still, on the sides, like where the ears were, I wasn't very happy with. I couldn't get that flat or even similar to a shape I wanted, whereas the visor was getting quite close, as you can see, like starting to create those harsh creased edges, and get the shape at the top right as well, and how it curved backwards, and something quite, I think it was quite appealing to look at, which at the end of the day is what I was trying to do, create something that was really nice to look at, like digitally, because I hadn't done that really. I think it was quite utilitarian in design, something like Bauhaus or Brutalist, like it served a purpose and that was it. So I was trying to create something a bit more designed, I guess is the word I'd use. So again, like as you can see here, it's lots of just moving into the sphere, trying to figure it out, not liking it, going back, taking a break, and just playing around with different forms, trying not to get bogged down in specifics and working at an overall shape, and then refining that shape. But yeah, since I hadn't done it before, it was really difficult trying to wrap my head around how all these tools worked. Yeah, so as you can see here, I'm really starting to get a hang of creasing edges to create harsh differences, and maybe that classic quote-unquote stormtrooper shape, especially the mandrels at the front, they're kind of like bulbous. I was really happy with how they were coming out, and I think kind of at this point you start to see something which I definitely think could class as like stormtrooper, I guess, in design. It's something that I think if I stopped here at basically any point, like it would have worked. I could have made a helmet out of it somehow, which, you know, wasn't the intention, but, you know, it was nice to know that I started to understand how it worked to a point where I was able to create something that looked distinctly like a helmet that I think could have been worked into later, but yeah, it definitely read as something that could go on a human form. As you can see, the kind of where the ears are, they're really starting to bunch in here, and that's due to the way that it works. So I got sick of it and started to delete edges out, creating like an origami shell of things. At this point here, you can see I start to use a plane. So a plane is different to a quad ball or a sphere. It's, imagine a piece of paper, and you're taking a piece of paper and you're trying to like fold it in origami to create those shapes, and then you create all of them separately, and later in a different tool set you patch them together, like the same as taping piece of paper, or maybe how else would you describe it? Paper mache, I guess, is another way of describing it. Yeah, I think that's the best way of describing it. So you can see here I got bored of trying to get the sides of the face. I needed a bit of a break, so I thought I'll work on different areas. So the band around the back, or the faceplate on the front, and using these planes, I started to get something that was very similar to what I wanted. And I think it clicked here, like, okay, this is the way to do it. So you create a piece of paper and you alter the forms according to your reference, and then once you've done that, it should all glue together. That was as much as I understood. So I thought, right, that's what I'll do. I'll just take a portion, like a side cheek piece or a piece that wrapped around the eye, and just create that, and then see if I could get that as sculptural as I wanted it. And then once it was sculptural, I could wrap all those pieces together to create the helmet. And eventually that was what I came up with. That was the best outcome, and it did actually produce the helmet I wanted to. But it was, I think at this point I'm probably 70 hours in, maybe longer, 100 hours in, maybe here. And I think I really started to get a grasp on how it worked, and I was working a lot faster. I mean, these forms I create in the next section here, starting now, like, I think I got these done in one sitting at the computer to get it right, which I was really happy with, especially because, you know, the first time I did it, I think I sat there for about 10 hours trying to play around with this quad ball and just not understanding how it worked. This idea of a clay ball, but the clay ball is like, it acts like clay, but it's like a ball of paper. So if you pull it too far, the paper rips and it opens up, and then it's no longer a three-dimensional object. It's just like a load of paper. So yeah, I think here you can see when I'm wrapping around the back of the head, I'm getting those really smooth curves. I'm understanding how complex and compound curves are interacting together, how I can get them to wrap around really harsh objects, and how I can get that nice combination of harsh lines but also really soft curves and everything, which I think that's what I found to be distinctly Stormtrooper-esque when I was designing this. Something that was, they're harsh, but they have really, really smooth curves all around the whole thing. As I say, that I'm looking at the mask right now. So yeah, I think I was a lot more successful here. I mean, especially under the faceplate, that's where I started to run into some problems again, because I had no idea of what that form under the faceplate was. I didn't know how far down the visor went, or you know, if it was pointed or if it was round, if it was completely flat. So I started to play around with the forms here, you can see, and I think I was a bit looser with that because I knew it would be hidden mostly by the faceplate. I was just trying to get it to interact with the visor itself in a way that I thought looked quite nice. So if the visor scrapped or something didn't work, I could then add it in, and I knew I'd be happy with the outcome. And I think here you can start to see it starts to become much more like the the reference material, and I'm quite excited to see where it's going at this point. Like at the beginning it was quite a slog to get up and do it sometimes. Now I'm like, I'm waking up early and just think about this 24/7, just really improving a skill set. I think it's the idea of getting into workflow and really understanding how it works. I'm feeling much more comfortable in it, and I think being able to produce something as difficult as this, as soon as I could do that and create something which I think looked really impressive, it was like a flowing river. It just kept flowing, and I just really wanted to get in it and explore more and try more difficult things. Yeah, I think, let me see my notes. Yeah, to be honest, here I'm getting to the end point, and working in the surface tool set here at the top, you'll see it says solid surface sheet metal tools. These tools are, I think, much more difficult because it was quite a mixture of parametric and sculptural elements. So it was putting everything together, but we had to make sure that all of these curved surfaces had compliant surfaces to link into, which I found the hardest bit, and understanding what was a three-dimensional object and what was like the shell or like a single piece of paper of a three-dimensional object. Putting in these holes at the front, I guess you'd call them, I started to think about what would go in them, or like small objects like these valves at the front, or vents, and how they interacted with the object, and making that one single object, so not lots and lots of things messily crammed into that helmet, but really like 5 distinctive cuboids stamped into it, how that worked, how the helmet would interact with the faceplate to create something that was really smooth, so when it was eventually printed out, it hugged really nicely onto the front, and there wasn't very much like open gap everywhere. I started to come in here to think about maybe if I was going to put in eye holes to see what they would look like in Photoshop, and I just decided I'm just going to do it on the program and see what I come up with and just have a play around. I put a few in, but in the end everything looks quite Iron Man, and it was something I was really trying to avoid, was something that looked derivative of another helmet directly. And the thing is with Iron Man, it's so universally understood that is the Iron Man helmet, that anything I really put in eye hole wise, it looked like that, so I just decided to scrap that, and it would be an entirely glass or acrylic visor of some kind in that universe. Next I moved on to the respirator valves, which were the things that would slot into those spheres stamped into the front, and they were really simple. That's parametric modelling, that's what I have a huge amount of experience in, and it was the same as making lightsabers, which I've done quite a lot, so it's just forms wrapped around a cylinder, which was quite a nice change, I think, because a lot of this was still very difficult, like mentally taxing, and it was harsh for it was tiring. That was, at the end of the day, it was tiring, getting all that to work. So I think doing things that I could get quite easily, it was more fun because it was just about playing around, just seeing what shapes worked and what didn't. Think about maybe adding something on to those like valves at the front, maybe something a bit more complex. Here you can see it where those like 3 circles would be. Eventually I did scrap this idea just because I thought it was getting too complex. There's a term called a mall ninja, someone described to me once, which was adding in stuff that's unnecessarily complicated because you think it looks cool and it serves no purpose. And I think here I was trying to think of a story and think, well, what's the purpose behind this? Why is all these objects on here, and what are they? So you have the helmet, the base helmet, and then you have these respirator valves, which I thought, if it's some kind of pilot or it's on a different planet, it might not have the oxygen that like we'd need as humans to live. So maybe there's oxygen kept in these, and that face guard, maybe it's a tougher material, so that it's, if anything hits it, or is someone goes to attack the face, that face guard will take the brunt of that. So yeah, here we go. Here was me starting to get a thickness for the helmet. So in 3D modelling, when you're using surface modelling, which is, imagine pieces of paper, you have a term called watertightness, and watertight is taking those pieces of paper and creating a three-dimensional object, or in other words, something that can be understood for a 3D printer. Because this is where I was going to be taking it eventually, I really took a lot of time to get this exactly as I wanted it to be for a 3D printer, like messing around with individual shapes and how they interacted with other shapes, so that for the wearer it would be comfortable, like, eventually, which did take some time, and I was going through and deleting faces and adding faces in, but I was happy in the end that whatever I was putting if I was going to put this on someone's head, it would be comfortable. And yeah, and you can see it changes colour to be this grey colour when it's finally a 3D printable object, something that is watertight. This object was adding at the front is something that's on a lot of soldering helmets, the old ones. I don't know what it is. I thought maybe I could add that into the face mask, some kind of clear visor. So I played around with that form for probably like 2 or 3 hours, and I just wasn't happy with it in the end. I thought it looked a bit not phallic but sexual, I think is the word I'd use. It like a bulge of some kind, and I don't think it added. I'd measured enough so I knew that high point would be lower than the chin, so I knew it would hide any speaking or anything like that functionally. But yeah, I scrapped all of this eventually because I wasn't happy with how it was coming out, and I think it was a bit of a waste of time. So you can see here I'm like, right, okay, there we go, let's just move on to something else. Back onto the respirators to see how they fit in. I was really happy with those. I think they look really good. So here I was splitting up the shape, so when I took this into render, here you go, I could have those as separate objects and be different materials. So here's me just picking materials, and it is basically painting. You're just painting to see what it looks like. Yeah, all the different views. You can see the elapsed time, how long it takes to render something out. It takes a very long time, especially with things like this. As this is real size, it's a lot more to render. Yeah, it's coming. This bit probably here was 150 to 200 hours of work, I'd say. I really feel like, that rule of 10,000 hours to master a skill. Like, I understand having spent that much time in just trying to do surface modeling and sculptural 3D modeling. Like, I really started to get a handle on it and understood it, and was really, really excited with what I was coming out with, and also the fluency of the skills I'd learned. So it was it's definitely something I wanted to work on more, and I have in my own time just done some more helmets, some more objects, just to have a play around more. This rendering as well, having dipped my toe in it but not actually giving it a lot of time, I was really happy with how these came out, and so I've given that a lot more thought and time to see how it goes. So I think we're kind of getting towards the end now. This is what you'd potentially give to a client to show, okay, well, here's what the object can look like at its cleanest and most polished. Yeah, so I think that's it. Oh no, there's a few more. I'll be back in part 2 to talk about the 3D printing of it. I think maybe, am I now talking about? Oh yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm cutting this up. Anyway, yeah, I'm going without a script at this point. So yeah, I'm cutting this up, ready for 3D printing. That's again is just cutting out sections of it and just thinking how this all interacts together and what is the best way that all of this can be cut out and laid on a print bed most efficiently, so it isn't a trillion parts that would be really hard and time intensive to put together, but also aren't huge parts because of the cost to run, the electricity involved, and also leaving that kind of stuff alone for long periods of time, it can be dangerous potentially. So I think I came up with 16 parts in total, 8 parts top, 8 parts at the bottom, and then I split the respirators into separate parts to print out, so they would slot together. All of the helmet had little pins involved, so it had locators, so all of the parts could locate together, like male and female style. Yeah, I think the whole thing took, in theory, about 80 hours to print. I think it came to, and then the respirators and the face mask was probably about another 40 hours. So you can see it's quite time intensive, but I guess it does save because you're able to replicate this and give files to other people. Yeah, I'm just playing around with the amount I'm doing. I think this is what I come to in the end. I'm very happy with what I decide to do. I think it's quite achievable. I can work in it and work with it, especially under being in quarantine and working from my parents' house with what I had available. I was still very confident I could come up with something quite professional. So here's me just putting it into Cura and getting all the settings right. It's going to be quite low quality because I'm working on it all. Okay, I'll see you all in part 2. Bye!